trump the wake maintenance zone, which simply means if your baby is just completely wiped out, had like a bomb of a nap day, maybe sick, maybe had shots, maybe hardly napped at all, completely overtired, then yes, go outside your normal 30-minute window and put your baby to bed earlier than you normally do. But on a typical night, when you're going to make changes or when you're going to travel, if you're going to expect your baby to go to bed more than 30 minutes earlier than normal, you're probably going to meet some resistance. Okay, so
Excuse me, Meg.
Yeah, Nancy.
My apologies.
No problem.
If I could just ask you to very briefly review, just very briefly, the first two slides, because I did not have the recording on, and I know that this one's going to want to be archived for people to use.
Oh, sure, no problem.
So if you, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the first slide, I had just mentioned that the circadian rhythm, or the body clock, is now developed in a 5-month-old. And we're talking about the 5 to 9 month age range. So you just want to keep in mind that at this age, your baby is capable of having a schedule. That schedule, okay, the circadian rhythm is depicted by this graph of different sleep hormones, which shows you sort of natural tendencies for sleepiness. So you see we have this peak in the overnight, of course. This particular graph is a baby who's having one single midday nap. The current theory, again, is that babies who are napping twice would have, 2 bumps in the graph, perhaps even 3. And then you have the decrease in the afternoon with the sleepiness, right, the circadian rhythm driving for sleepiness again in the overnight. Nancy, was this one? Do you need me to do this one too?
Yes.
The circadian rhythm functions the best with regularity. So you want to be sure that now when your baby's reaching that 5-month mark, you're thinking about what's my desired bedtime, what's my desired wake up time. Have your baby going to bed within the same 30-minute window each night and waking up within the same 30-minute window each morning. Remember that especially in the morning wake up time, if you have wide fluctuations in morning wake up time, it'll cause that circadian rhythm to desynchronize. You're going to lose your ability to plan for predictable naps. And if, it's going to make it more difficult for you to know when is it really the right time, or when is it most fair for me to be asking my baby to sleep. One thing I should just say really quick, we have this picture of the nice sunset, that the circadian rhythm is driven by the cycle of light and dark, by exposure to light and dark, okay? And you can manipulate it. So, where I have this wake maintenance zone for this baby, one family or one baby's wake maintenance zone may be earlier or later than another family. It really is going to depend on when that baby's typical bedtime occurs. This is just one example. This baby, obviously has an early bedtime. You can manipulate your baby's circadian rhythm through your exposure to light and dark. Dark always when you want your baby to be asleep, and light and the times when you want your baby to be awake. Okay, so the typical sleep length for 5 to 9 months, I get this question all the time in sleep consults, parents who want to make sure their babies are getting enough sleep. And, certainly it's always important to look at your child. Do they seem well rested? Are they acting okay? Are they falling apart at the end of the day? How's their attention span? But for the most part, you're looking at, for a good sleeper, 10.5 to 12 hours of sleep overnight. And having 1 to 2 night feedings is not considered a sleep problem, okay? And I'll say that again, between 5 and 9 months, having 1 to 2 night feedings is not a sleep problem. It might be a problem for mom or dad, but it's not a sleep problem if the sleep is well consolidated on either side of the feeding. In other words, you have a long stretch, quick feeding, long stretch, and maybe you have 2 feedings. Generally, the 5 to 6 month mark, 2 feedings. 6 to 9 month mark, you're probably, almost all babies need one. A lot of babies won't need any feedings. But just so you know, if your baby's still waking up once a night to eat at 7 months, 8 months, 9 months, there's nothing wrong. It may be worthwhile for you to change it if you're tired and your pediatrician is encouraging you to, but don't feel that you have to. So for the 5 to 9 month mark, very definitely, 100%, absolutely, by 5 months, you want your baby to have the first long stretch of sleep, and that's generally going to be at least 6 hours. That would be something that would be very change worthy. If your baby's 5 months and not having a long stretch in the beginning of the night, that would definitely be something to be working on first. That's probably the first thing I would work on. Mhm.
Sometimes babies, if you can go back to that previous slide, sometimes that first stretch of sleep is so early that parents are concerned about that, and that brings up a lot of questions about dream feeds. So if the baby is going down and their first stretch of sleep is a beautiful 5-hour period from 7 to midnight, the baby is doing a beautiful job doing just what they're supposed to do, but it's not particularly beneficial to the parents who are up until 10 and then disrupted at midnight.
Yeah,
But dream
that's
feeds really
true.
interfere with the
Dream feeds might
development
work
of that
fine for
longer
the
sleep cycle. Is that right,
newest
Meg?
little newborns, and it's not something we recommend. It's also not something that we would tell someone to stop doing if it's working for them, in the first 4 months. By the time you get to 5 months, we do recommend stopping it unless there's a medical reason, because, like Nancy said, it does interfere with that first long stretch, and almost always, because of the way the sleep cycle is organized and the type of sleep you get, it almost never really accomplishes what the parents are hoping it will anyway. They're hoping to feed their baby extra food at 10, so they'll sleep all the way through until 6 in the morning. And, almost always the baby's still going to be up at 3 or 4 or 5, which is a more natural wake up for a 5 to 9 month old. And we have this lovely picture of your baby is going to bed at 7, having a nice long stretch. Maybe get a little hangout time with your spouse. So sometimes that can be kind of a good thing too.
I think that's a big transition time for new parents, first-time parents, to kind of get their heads around, because they're often used to keeping the newborn with them in the living room 8 till 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and then they finally get the baby to sleep and go to sleep themselves. But that evening fussy zone often begins to shift. It's around the same time, but it means something different. It actually means the baby's probably ready for the bedtime routine. So it can be hectic if you have a 3-month-old and you get home from daycare at 6:30 or 7, and then the next thing that happens essentially is you nurse the baby and put the baby to sleep. Then you have your dinner with your partner and some quiet time, because the baby often, if the baby is going to be up at 6 or
That's a
7 to get
big
ready for
dilemma for
daycare, their
working parents. It's
bedtime is
one
going to be
we do
7 or
talk
8
about a lot
p.m.
in our
There's not a lot
consults,
of
how to
time in the
manage that so
evening there.
everybody's happy and everybody's getting the sleep they need. Um, okay, so 5 to 9 months naps. Uh, at 5 months, some babies, especially if they were born a little early, may still have a little erratic napping patterns. The circadian rhythm is not going to be controlling for your naps. The naps are controlled by your baby's sleep pressure or sleepiness. And that is almost always fully in play for babies by 6 months. We typically recommend, if babies have any nap work to, you're thinking about working on naps, 5.5 months is a great time to really focus hard on your naps. Not to say there aren't, gazillion things you can be doing for weeks or even months before that point, but if you're at a crisis point and you need to fix your naps, 5.5 months is when you're going to start. You're looking at more mature napping patterns. You are looking at your baby's sleepy signs, eye rubbing, yawning, slowing down, things that you may have been working on in the newborn phase. However, clock time is starting to be important too. And I always tell parents, don't get stuck in the newborn rut. At 5 months, napping your baby every 90 minutes is going to get you a day full of mini cat naps. The naps now start to space 2 and even 3 hours apart. It doesn't mean the day your baby turns 5 months old, he can stay awake for 3 hours. But definitely by 6 months, you are having windows of wakefulness that may be as long as 3 hours, or at least 2.5. And what you have is typically a morning nap, a midday nap, and a late afternoon nap. The late afternoon nap is almost always more of a one sleep cycle nap, like a 30 to 40-minute cat nap that's tiding the baby over to bedtime. Daytime sleep is averaging about 3 to 3.5 hours at this age. Question that everyone asks, should I ever wake my baby? And my answer is, if you would like your baby to be on a predictable schedule, you may need to wake your baby sometimes. And particularly in the morning, if your baby is, gearing up for oversleeping one morning, had a rough night, was awake a lot, your first temptation is going to be to let them sleep in to play catch up. And remember that that's actually going to, it can cause the circadian rhythm to desynchronize. You're going to lose your ability to plan your naps for that day. And you don't want your baby transferring lost night sleep into the day. If baby needs to take a little extra long nap or, make up that night sleep the next night, that's fine. With naps too, people are juggling siblings, pickups, drop-offs, schedules. If you need your baby to be napping at certain times during the day, you may have to wake your baby from a morning nap, for example, so that she's tired enough to go down for her afternoon nap before you have to run and get the kids from school at 3 o'clock. Does that sound like my life? So, the answer is definitely it is okay to wake your baby if you are doing it to protect the regularity of your schedule and if your baby is still getting enough sleep. Okay, the next slide you're going to see is probably something you're only seeing at ISIS, and it's so, so cool. Wait until you see this, but just a little background. What I'm going to show you is a sleep plot. Okay, it's a graph, and if you see below here, the boxes are going to be shaded in when the baby is asleep, and the boxes are blank when the baby is awake. Okay, so take a look at your baby's sleep in the first year. All right, this first column, this is newborn sleep. Remember that? Totally erratic and all over the place. Day is night is all the same to the baby. Okay, but then you can see around the 11-12 week, you start to get these first, stretches of black in the right-hand column. Maybe I should describe this a little better. What you're seeing here is the far left of the first column is sort of the middle of the night. And then when you see the first black line start to develop, that's morning. And then each bar in the middle of the day, those are the 3 naps. Okay, and then the black line that you see developing along the right-hand side is bedtime. Okay, so I'm going to show you this a little more clearly. Okay, so here we are months 5 to 6. What you're having is more sleep at night than during the day, for sure. You're having no wake-ups. Remember that first long 6-hour stretch. No wake-ups in the first third of the night. Few to no wake-ups during the last 2/3 of the night. You may have 1 to 2 feedings, but at this point they should be brief, and sleep should be consolidated in between the feedings. Your daytime sleep, you're having a 3-nap-a-day pattern. You can see from this particular baby that, it's not perfectly perfect every day, but there is a very clear pattern. The first nap is beginning about 2 hours after the baby's wake-up time, and remember to keep the wake-up time regular. The second nap is beginning about 2 to 3 hours later. For older babies, it's really 2.5 to 3 hours later. And the third nap is again another, usually about 2 hours. It's just sort of that cat nap, that mini snooze to get the baby through until bedtime. Nap number 1 says should last around an hour, and that is true. The average length of the morning nap is 60 to 90 minutes. If baby's well rested from a good night's sleep, baby doesn't need a real mega, like a 2+ hour nap. If your babies are having really super long morning naps, take a look at your night and see is something going on with your night. Is baby not getting enough sleep at night? baby having a lot of wake ups at night, or perhaps your window of wakefulness in the morning is too long and it requires baby to need a real super long nap in the morning. Okay, months 6 to 9 is typically when nap 3 starts to merge in with nap 2, or some parents just, make nap 3 go away on their own. They just stop offering their baby a nap. But when that happens, you will see here on the far right of this graph that the bedtime starts to move earlier. With the loss of the third nap, the bedtime moves earlier. During months 6 through 9, night feedings will gradually disappear. And I love how we just say this as if, your baby will just naturally, gradually, and happily drop these wonderful night feedings. I hope it happens that way for you, and for a lot of babies it does. But in case it doesn't, by 9 months, if your baby is still hanging on to the feedings, it is the time you want to think about helping your baby to eliminate them. If your choice is to have kind of a full night independent sleep in the crib. And remember, you always do that with weaning. Please don't ever stop feeding cold turkey. We're going to do a webinar actually on how to do a whole wean process with baby, but just to put it out there, if your pediatrician or your mother-in-law or whoever is telling you, oh, just stop giving them the bottle, just give them some water, please don't do that. And you're right, Nancy, it's better for milk supply too, to not do cold turkey. Okay, so that was the overview to remember. Circadian rhythm is very much in play in this age range. Continue to reinforce the schedule using light and dark. Keep your bed and wake times regular. You want to be expecting to have 3 naps a day with naps spacing 2 to 3 hours apart. And by 9 months, you're looking for a third nap to drop away. 1 to 2 night feedings are still considered normal. And you're looking at 10.5 to 12 hours of night sleep that may be interrupted by those 1 or 2 feedings, and 3 to 3.5 hours of sleep during the day. If your baby is falling under those, those averages, then and seems great, fine, no problem, sleeping well, happy, just a little shy of those numbers, that's probably fine. If your baby's shy of those numbers but sleep is interrupted, cranky, fussy, kind of seems like he's melting down at the end of the day, probably worth making a change at this point. Okay.
Meg, is
Yeah, good question.
transitioning from
It
the
does